defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay. So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends.
Your prompt doesn't have any meaning, dude. Good. Oh my gosh.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. If you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
You live for it, or you die for it.
So Jordan Peterson, somebody that I used to look up to like 5 or so years ago, went on Jubilee, and it is absolutely fucking... Honestly, I thought Elazar Perez was the worst Jubilee debater. Jordan Peterson takes the cake by a country mile. I already watched this debate last night, kind of skimmed through it to be able to see whether this is worth my time or not. And yes, it is very much worth my time. So we're just going to dive right into it, but just make sure if you like this video, do like, subscribe, comment, and share. And other than that, I really don't have much else to say, so let's go.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
I'm pretty sure they do. They reject a creator of the entire universe, or creators of the entire universe, as they see fit. I think it's pretty self-explanatory as to what atheism is and what they understand. So, oh, this is gonna get really fucking bad.
My experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And they've often been hurt by someone who was religious, or by the religious enterprise, or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have...
I don't think it's necessarily generic, it's just how it is. The entire claim of religion is that there's a being that created the universe and everything in it, has an afterlife, stuff like that. That's generally the claim made by Christianity and all these other different religions. What the fuck is he saying? It is not that deep, Jordan. It's really not that deep.
How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that out?
God is the thing who created everything, like a higher deity that doesn't exist in this mortal plane. It's really not that difficult.
When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that
yeah, there's like fucking a bazillion different ways to interpret it. All across the globe, there's a bunch of non-denominations, and there's a bunch of big denominations. There's so many ways to view the Bible because it's so goddamn cryptic. Pun entirely intended, by the way.
I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could...
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example.
It's such pseudo-intellectual nonsense. Everybody knows what the fuck God is, dude.
God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God
that's
that
right.
atheists are hypothetically
I know the
rejecting.
story.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him.
An ass
and
crack.
when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not...
I think I understand what he's saying. You can't understand what you're rejecting because you literally cannot know it. We literally can't see it, otherwise we'd fucking die. Like that story. I get what he's saying, and honestly, I can agree to a certain extent that we can't know the unknowable. We can't understand what we're rejecting in the sense that we don't understand the specifics of God, like what he might look like, what his ultimate vision is for humanity as a whole, like God's plan and everything. You can't understand that because none of us know what the fuck he plans. But we understand and I'm saying we as somebody who's just not Christian, I'm agnostic personally, but I don't agree with the prompt in the sense of rejecting the existence of God as a whole. We have a good understanding of what God is, which is what the guy explained earlier, an all-powerful, omnipotent entity. But in terms of understanding the nature of God, yeah, I don't think we can understand that. That's actually a pretty interesting prompt now that I think about it, to be honest.
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't
I
exhaust
like this guy, by the way. He seems very knowledgeable. After skimming the whole video last night and stuff like that, this seems like the most knowledgeable panel of 20x people by far that I've ever seen on this show. It's actually amazing how many knowledgeable people they got to fucking walk all over this old dude who's completely washed up. And something I want to add, by the way, something that I actually want to add, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting in the sense of we don't know the nature of God. Okay, but can't you also argue that Christians don't know what they're accepting? Because it's based blindly on faith. We have no clue anything about God other than what the Bible tells us, and even then there's no consensus whatsoever on what it actually says. You don't understand what you're rejecting, and the believers don't understand what they're accepting. So, like, I don't know. There's not really a way to win with this, because either way, it's unknowable. The only logical stance when it comes to religion, in my opinion, is agnosticism, because it's just flat out unknowable.
Existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point in
My question.
I genuinely think that Jordan Peterson is just agnostic. I don't know why he doesn't identify as agnostic, but he seems to really be basing his entire foundation on atheists trying to assert something as fact, such as God doesn't exist or something like that. And he goes, we don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know that. I think that's his entire foundation, is that atheists are asserting something that you cannot prove to be true.
In order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I didn't
claim.
say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't
Right.
say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point. You're saying
The thing is, as well, I think there is a very high chance everybody here, like this guy, for example, I think it's Brian or something, I probably had that wrong. He's probably trying to formulate his argument based on the idea that Jordan Peterson is a Christian, considering the fact that this video was originally titled 1 Christian versus 20 Atheists. So he's trying to catch Jordan Peterson in a bind by saying, you believe in a Christian God, but not this Polynesian God? But the issue is Jordan Peterson, as far as we know, isn't actually a Christian. So it's like a complete mess just from the get-go before it even starts, because not even Jubilee knows what the fuck he is. They just changed the title to Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. Like, you can't even attach a label to him because he won't tell anybody what he believes.
Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
What?
Okay. You can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they
That's not what religious means to most people, though. Like, he keeps changing the definitions of terms from their colloquial usage to something completely different. He does this with the word worship later on as well, and it makes it impossible for the audience to understand what he's saying. There might be a couple people who understand what he's saying, but from a purely rhetorical and persuasive standpoint, Jordan Peterson looks absolutely fucking awful. It's not even close. Even a lot of Republicans on Twitter are saying that he got his ass handed to him by these fucking kids.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
Who the fuck define... Outside of that guy, I've never heard anybody else define God as the voice of conscience?
Defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
Nobody uses that definition. I'm just putting that out there. The average Jubilee viewer doesn't know what the fuck that means.
But then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament,
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever, so
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay,
major
all right,
Old Testament
all right,
prophets.
all
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
but
understand
you-
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old
I
Testament.
think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Ooh.
Because
I
again,
asked you if you
okay,
believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting,
Damn, got his ass. That is true.
you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My
You know how everybody defines God, dude.
I didn't make
Ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Well, it was very nice
Nobody
to-
understands what the fuck he's saying. Although I do, after listening to him a little bit more, I admittedly understand what he's saying by the prompt, and I can agree to a certain extent that there's so many different ways to understand God, as he listed out a few, and you can't understand all of it for sure. But when we're talking about God, colloquially speaking, as like 99% of the population understands it, God is seen as a deity who is omnipotent, all-knowing, and created the universe and all of that kind of stuff. That is how most people see God, and I think most people understand what an omnipotent deity is and what it's supposed to look like. If you want to talk about all these other things, for sure, but I would word the prompt a little bit differently than this, because it not only seems very provocative, but it's also going to cause a lot of confusion, especially among Jubilee viewers who aren't necessarily the most philosophically educated.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
I do agree with that. I'll just say I do agree with that. That is definitely like a philosophical thing, although I think that's also kind of a straw man, because I don't even think atheists find morality and purpose within science for the most part, outside of maybe like natural law or something like that, which is kind of based in science from what I'm aware of, but that's something I'm not the most educated on.
I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just
No,
Christianity?
I think it's the
'Cause
flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
What do you
of
mean by
morality.
just?
So wouldn't that count as a social science then? So you could find morality and purpose within science, because culture and all of that, I believe, falls into social science, since that's a whole field in itself, human behavior and everything with anthropology and stuff like that. It can get a little bit complex when you kind of zoom out and see all the branches of science and see that there's science around human behavior, and you could possibly group morality in there and how we develop that as well.
You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best.
Find
for-
higher power? Are you fucking shitting me? I think everybody knows what we mean by higher power. We mean God. We mean entities that have more power than us. And by more power, I mean literally can do what they want above us. I don't know how you don't understand that.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ.
No, not really. To give you some context on what the book of Job is, in case you don't know it, even though it's a pretty well-known book in the Bible, the entire point of what Job went through is to test his faith. It was not a test to see if he would still believe in God, even if it was going to hell. It was a test to see if he would still believe in God, despite God torturing the shit out of him. God did a bunch of stuff to him to make him fucking miserable because he had a bet with Satan. And the entire point was that Satan believed that he would become an atheist and stop believing in God, or at least start hating God. And God's like, no, he's still going to believe even after I put him through all this stuff.
Right? Because they were required. Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this
He should correct them on the actual story itself and the detail that he got wrong, which is the motivation, the point behind it, because he just got that completely wrong. Some of this I honestly just don't really have much to say because it's just like mostly talking past each other and I don't really have much to input. And I also don't want to constantly pause the video every 5 seconds going over what's being said, so.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure, but I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians just like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe.
Yes,
Your notion
yes,
of God
exactly. He's calling him out on talking past everybody about what's going on with God. I like that. Good job, Parker.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you...
It's not circular. It's just the definition of fucking believe, man. What do you mean that's circular? Believe. To think that it's true. That's the definition of believe, man.
You mean
How is
when you
that
say
circular?
you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
You live for it, or you die for it.
It sounds like a threat or something. What the fuck?
You live for it, or you die for it.
I don't know why he said that so sternly, as if it's like super important.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
so I explain, like I could
I'm pretty sure I would not, like, die for my beliefs. I'm gonna be completely honest. If somebody held a gun to my head and asked me if I was an anarchist, of course I would say no. I'm not gonna fucking tell him yes and then get my brains blown out. That's not productive, and I could be doing a lot more stuff if I wasn't dead. So of course, yeah, I'm gonna lie about it in that situation.
the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life.
Yep.
Right? Like I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life.
so sure.
You
Don't be so sure.
What the fuck is with this stern-ass face when he's saying these things, too? His attitude is so weird.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't
much do
lie
you
to
know
save
about
my clinical
me?
practice.
would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a
Well,
certain
what if it does save them, dumbass?
and you want to protect them?
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like. Are you
clarify
like
it.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic
yeah, yeah.
hypothetical
Like, you,
where you
like, if
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
obviously you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's
answering
life.
it in
Obviously,
a
that's not
manner
what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about
you're-
truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
He
Obviously,
doesn't
right?
really actually answer the questions. He's not engaging with the hypotheticals. He just keeps saying, I won't answer that in the most roundabout way possible to try to justify him not engaging with the conversation at all. Inevitably, with a debate like this, you're going to have to come down to hypotheticals because none of this is based in physical reality. Morality and purpose are not based in physical reality, so you're going to have to rely on hypotheticals to test people's morality.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to
Who
tell
said
the-
that it has to be based on your previous mistakes, though, dude? It doesn't have to be based on your previous mistakes. You could literally just be laying in bed one day with your wife, and then somebody busts the door down and starts putting you in this hypothetical you call impossible. That's something that can possibly happen, especially if you get doxxed or something because of how hated you are by so many people, Peterson.
In some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation.
Here's the thing about Jordan Peterson, right? Especially with this debate that we're going through. There is some sort of possible validity to what he's saying, but the context of the debate and everything like that is absolutely horrible. This is not where you want to be going into semantics and everything. There could be a debate on expanding our knowledge of what God is beyond the conventional God is a floating sky fairy in the sky that made everything and is omnipotent and all that stuff. There is validity to that, having that kind of conversation. That being said, a Jubilee panel is not where you want to do that. Nobody knows what you're talking about. Not to mention, with Jordan Peterson specifically, throughout this entire debate, very rarely outside of the prompts has he proposed an actual positive claim or a positive stance that he can defend. For most of the debate, he's just asking, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? There could be some genuine dialogue with these prompts because I actually do agree with some of them, and I do think that there is possible validity to some of them, but he's just horrible at talking with people these days. He used to be a lot sharper back in like 2016 and stuff like that. Dude was very razor sharp. I'm not sure if it's because he took a bunch of drugs and also was on the carnivore diet and that completely melted his brain or what. He's gone downhill significantly. It's actually kind of sad to see, honestly. And also, let me make myself bigger now that I think about it. There we go.
Situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage.
There are a lot of situations, Mr. Peterson, where you can be put in a situation like Parker's describing without having to lie your way to get there. The police can bust down your door one day out of nowhere and put you in the exact same situation Parker is putting you in. It has nothing to do with how you got there. It has to do with the fact that it even happens to begin with, and that can be entirely out of your control. And you know this completely eviscerates you because you're not even willing to engage in it at all. The thing is, he's not engaging with any kind of question or argument posed to him that even slightly scrutinizes him. He can't answer a single thing because it's like he doesn't even have a stance to defend beyond the prompt.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's not
the
what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors.
It's not impossible and it's not restricted. This can literally happen today because of how Trump is starting to kidnap people out of their homes, out of fucking colleges, and shipping them off to God knows where, like El Salvador or Gitmo. This is happening right now, especially if you are of darker skin color, like brown, Hispanic, Venezuelan.
My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Do I agree or disagree with that prompt? It really fucking depends on what you mean by worship. And unfortunately, this entire debate, this entire section seems to be getting caught up on what the hell worship means. If we're talking about the conventional definition of worship, which is idolizing some sort of deity that is beyond our material plane of existence, no, that's not even close to true. If we're talking about worship, like, I honestly don't even know how to define worship in any other context than that, to be honest.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with defining terms. How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost.
Then just say prioritize. Why the fuck do you have to say worship? It's like purposefully inflammatory to just cause some sort of discussion that ends up never happening because you keep arguing about the dictionary definition of words. Nobody uses worship to mean prioritize. Nobody does that. Outside of maybe a select few people, depending on the context of a discussion, but most people are not using it like that. And that's going to cause a lot of confusion, and he has to know this. This is like such common sense stuff. I don't understand why he words his arguments this way, besides sounding like a pseudo-intellectual, like modern-day Hegel or Socrates kind of thing, which he does horrible at, by the way.
It's like having a preference over something rather than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use
Oh
it
my
to
God.
direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like if the argument is everybody prioritizes something, even though they might not know it, yeah, everybody prioritizes something. Everybody has a hierarchy of priorities where one thing is more important than the other. Yeah, that's common sense. But it's because you use the word worship is where the confusion comes in and everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's why people are so confused by these kinds of prompts. He's using language in a way that almost nobody else uses it. Ah, yes, this
Dr.
fucking
Peterson.
dude.
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay,
A
that's
stupid
it.
definition once again.
That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
Oh, that is fucking rough. This kid got him within like 10 seconds. That's the issue with the semantics thing. Jordan's feet are being held to the fire already on the issue with his taboo definitions of worship. This kid's holding his feet to the fire really well already.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship.
Okay, but even if it's not at the top, you worship things close to the top. So you can worship God, and then you can also worship Mary by your standards that you laid out with your definition. Things that are at the top of the hierarchy or near the top of the hierarchy are things that you worship.
What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
what do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my definition.
you understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can
Catholic.
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition, but your
He
original
is adding
definition-
stuff, yes.
the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that
I'm
relevant?
not.
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
Why is he asking you that? He literally just stated the question to you. That's the reason why he asked you that. By your definition of worship, do the Catholics worship Mary? He's trying to catch you in the trap that you laid for yourself with this really stupid definition of worship. And he's doing pretty well so far. The issue with the kid, though, is that I think he's getting a little bit too aggressive, which is why Jordan Peterson shuts him down completely in a few minutes. I think he probably should have been a little bit lighter in order to keep this conversation going more, in order to hold Jordan Peterson's feet to the fire even more, so he doesn't have a reason to brush you off like that. Because the kid's holding himself up very well so far. He's just too debate-brained to be able to keep the conversation going for too long because he just got too aggressive.
Well,
And I mean,
either you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I
private.
was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
The kid's completely right. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure I would necessarily gone that hard so he can't say, "Oh, I'm done with this kid. He's being a smartass."
Do I worship
I don't know,
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So,
You are the one who made the fucking prompt, buddy. How are you? What? You're the one who made the prompt and laid out the definition.
Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the day, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy.
Why does he look so
The way
pissed
that you
off?
attend to your
Look at his
life
face.
is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship is
shame.
almost a spectrum, right? Or it's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like that's a good
So
question.
when
It's
is,
like
when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How close
worship.
to the top?
How do you
Because
measure that though is the thing. How do you measure the top and the bottom and stuff? This is so like metaphysical and philosophical and talking about measuring stuff. When does it become worship? He's pressing him on that too, I think. But the issue is Jordan Peterson doesn't have an actual stance on it, so he doesn't have an answer for it.
Do you privilege her compared to other women?
Of course I privilege her compared to other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because we talked.
By the definition you offered, Peterson, yes, he does. Literally, this entire fucking prompt can be changed with one word, and everybody will agree with it. The prompt changed from everybody worships something even though they might not know it, to everybody prioritizes something, which is literally what Peterson defines worship as. Swap that one word out and everybody will agree with this prompt and you can get rid of it. I really think he's just doing this to sound more intellectual like and to try to make people think higher of him as if he's some sort of great philosopher. What somebody needs to actually ask him now that I think about it is, why do you use the word worship instead of prioritize? Because it just comes across as if you're trying to say something for the sake of saying something and stir up discourse where there's not any actual discourse to be had. Swap that one word out and you don't have this prompt.
What a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine does.
Good. Well,
so it's about purpose
so
and
let me,
definitions.
yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then. The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So
and maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and
If you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise
then do it. Stop just saying the same thing over and over, Peterson. God damn. Make an argument besides, oh, it depends. Oh, you need to do this. You need to do that. Make an actual argument. Stop just pivoting and bouncing around everywhere.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay, so if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true, and then you...
okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
That is... He just debunked his own fucking prompt. Nihilists don't worship anything? Conversation over. You just debunked yourself. Oh, good lord. I might be too tired for this.
They're incoherent in their worship, and hand gestures like that aren't going to...
That is a complete... You literally just said they didn't worship anything, and now you're saying they're incoherent in their worship. I don't even think he knows what he's saying at this point.
Help.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because
well,
you just said they
the
can't
mere
be.
fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way...
Talk about fucking gish galloping. Goddamn, he just asked him like 5 questions. Oh my gosh.
It's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends.
Your prompt doesn't have any meaning, dude. Good. Oh my gosh. Let's see what he has to say.
Accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
I mean, we have a lot of Christian morality baked into the Western civilization just because it's influenced the Western world so much. But, so I can agree with that part to a certain extent. Of course, they deny the religious foundational stories. I would say it's kind of like half true, just because a fair amount of morals in the Western world seem to be derived from Christianity to some extent. And I think a lot of atheists seem to want to shut that down for some reason. I don't know why. It just kind of seems to be true. Western values were pretty heavily influenced by Christianity. And I'm saying this as a non-Christian, by the way. I'm a more agnostic personally.
So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy and
And that is why I say partially and not entirely inspired by Christianity. Actually, wait, now that I think about it, we used slavery for a long time, and we also used, we've also done genocide separate from religion and stuff, so, maybe there's a little bit more nuance to that than I originally anticipated.
Numbers and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
Face.
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical life.
The thing that I would probably respond to if I was in Peterson's shoes is that there's more to it than that, and there could be some sort of way to justify that with the whole Jesus dying on the cross for our sins kind of thing. That would probably be the go-to justification from a typical Christian.
If we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So,
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say
Game.
that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian
I
God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian
I
ethical.
said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's
He looks so mad when he says that too. What the fuck?
Don't put words into my mouth.
I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people...
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one
Ooh,
battle
he's
which
got
they
the
lost, and God
context.
says,
Ooh, that's actually pretty good. He came prepared.
That's it. I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he
Goddamn
commands
earth.
the Israelites
Hey.
to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not.
Nope.
The genocide...
Oh, I wonder what he views Palestine versus Israel.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably...
no. You don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God...
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm
said
already waiting a
find
sec.
one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say
just
any of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation you're
rephrase.
a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously.
Anytime Jordan Peterson gets freaking cornered, he calls the other person a smartass. Have you considered they are smart and you are an ass? Hey.
People like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God, or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will of the Odyssey fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried to
respond to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's...
How do you have no idea? The entire point of God is that he's omnipotent and could do literally anything he wants. He could create an infinite amount of universes because he's God.
If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values?
Yeah, good job. I like this question. This is a very good question. If Jordan Peterson doesn't say this is a very good question, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it is a good question. And, okay, there we go.
That's a good question. I spent
Yes, it is a good question. Thank you.
time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention. right? And the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. You know, I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system, and I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
Well, it's still dominant in the Western world, but in the Eastern world, you have Islam, and you have all these other different religions that are scattered about in like Africa and stuff, I believe, right? Christianity's only taken over a quarter of the world, maybe? Not the entire thing by any definition. I think he's severely overstating how much influence Christianity actually has on anything outside the West.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up
that is a thing. Yeah, that is a thing. There is some pretty decent influence on Christianity from paganism.
Other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean, I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate in Christianity.
So if I'm living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or
that is true, yeah. If they're all pretty similar, then okay, well that sucks.
That was good.
That is a good question, though. That is a good question. He should have.
You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment. Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way: sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask
you a question? How about you know that you put yourself there?
I'm pretty sure you'll know if you're in hell when you're in hell because of how it's described as like eternal torment stuff. I can't think of any way off the top of my head of how that can be interpreted any other way than as a really stupid question. If anybody else knows, do leave a comment. My general thoughts on this overall, some of the prompts here from Jordan Peterson can really actually inspire some pretty deep conversations. I do like the first one. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. I can see an actual genuine discussion coming from that one, because we don't understand God because we literally are incapable of understanding God, whatever it may be. It could be a dude, it could be a gal, it could be a black person for all we know. We can't understand him literally. So I can actually agree with that prompt depending on the way you're looking at it. There's a colloquial way, the normal way of looking at it, and then you have the more philosophical way that Jordan Peterson's trying to go into, but he does it very, very poorly. So I can actually understand that prompt and agree with it to an extent. Second prompt, morality and purpose can't be found within science. I do actually agree with that one because purpose and morality are obviously a thing found in philosophy and stuff. Unless you want to include like social science or something like that, then it becomes a little bit gray. But overall, I can actually agree with that prompt. Everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it. That is a really stupid prompt because all you have to do is replace worship with prioritize, which was his definition of worship, and then you can get rid of that prompt because I don't think anybody's actually going to disagree with that. Atheists accept Christian morality but deny the religion's foundational stories. You can kind of half agree with it to an extent because there are some more Christian morals that are ingrained into Western civilization that we do take some sort of inspiration from just because it's so ingrained in our culture and stuff like that, right? So from a purely unbiased standpoint, that stuff I don't actually have an issue with entirely in itself. The problem is that this is a debate analysis video, and I'm analyzing Jordan Peterson's debate skills. And sorry to say, the way he talks here is absolutely awful. He muddies definitions. He's using very vague definitions. Most of this most of the dialogue here overall is focused on pedantics, semantics, definitions, and not the actual arguments that are being proposed. And the weird thing is, back in the day, like 6 years ago at least, back in like 2017 to 2020, this dude used to actually be really sharp. He was wrong on a lot of things, but I do genuinely think he was actually pretty quick-witted, sharp, and very careful with his words. I think his lifestyle of doing a bunch of drugs, all of the depression stuff, going on a carnivore diet, have cooked his brain. Because if he didn't do that, he would honestly have probably put up a lot better fight here. But from a purely rhetorical standpoint and a purely persuasive standpoint, which is why I'm trying to look at this from, he did god-awful. And even conservatives on Twitter are bashing this guy, saying that he's gotten destroyed by these intolerable liberal Reddit atheists and stuff like that, which he has. There are very few people defending him, and that's for a reason. But that being said, the prompts themselves could have had inspired genuine discussions that would be really interesting to watch. It's just unfortunate that this guy of all people in his current mental state is the one that has to represent these prompts and try to argue for them, which he barely did at all at best. Other than that though, I really don't have much else to say. Thank you very much for watching. All the full uncut debates are going behind YouTube members. If you want full Discord access outside the one chat where you can challenge me or other people to debates, definitely check out my Patreon. I have my Ko-Fi with all my social medias down below. And I'm also a personal trainer, just a little self-sponsor here. I am a weight loss specialized personal trainer. You can check me out on step1fit.com. I'll leave the link in the description below for the YouTube video cut of this, so you can make a consultation with me and I can help you out with your fitness goals. I don't want to go on forever with that just because I don't want to seem like I'm shilling myself or as a corporate sponsor or whatever. And then yeah, other than that, I really don't have much else to say. See you guys on the next video.